I used to think heartbreak would feel like a blade, quick and sharp, slicing clean through my life. I was wrong. It felt more like finally being allowed to breathe. When Caroline sat across from me that night, her hands trembling, her lips pulling, into some kind of apology she hadn't yet spoken, I already knew. You don't live with someone for years without noticing when their soul quietly packs a suitcase and leaves. She stared at her glass, the ice clinking against it louder than her voice when she said, "Charles, I'm sorry, I love someone else." There it was, the confession that should have shattered me into dust. Instead, a smile tugged at the corner of my mouth, too faint for her to see. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't anger. It was the kind of smile you wear when you realize the prison door you've been rattling for years was never locked. "All right," I said, voice steady. "When do you want to sign the papers?" Caroline flinched like I'd slapped her. Maybe she had imagined a different scene, me begging maybe, or shouting. She didn't expect this version of me. She didn't expect the part of me that had already grieved the marriage long before she gathered the courage to bury it. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands were still shaking. Mine weren't. I finished my drink in one slow, measured swallow, stood up, and tossed a few bills onto the table. As I walked out of that restaurant, out of that life, I realized I wasn't the man who had proposed with shaking hands and wild hope all those years ago. That man was gone, dead and buried beneath the years of silent resentment and nights spent wondering what went wrong. Good riddance. There's nothing more liberating than finally realizing you don't have to stay where you are no longer wanted. I wasn't always this calm. There was a time when the idea of losing Caroline would have torn me apart. When her name alone was enough to make my heart race like a teenager's, when every glance from her felt like a gift I didn't deserve. Back then, I thought love was supposed to hurt a little. I thought devotion meant sacrifice, even if the sacrifice was my pride, my dreams, or the tiny voice inside my chest that warned me she would never truly belong to me. Caroline wasn't just beautiful. She was the kind of woman you saw across a crowded room and instinctively knew you could lose yourself in. Effortlessly elegant, with that cool detachment that made you want to be the one she chose, the one she finally warmed up to. And God help, me, she chose me. Or at least, she made me believe she had. We met at a gala fundraiser downtown, one of those suffocating evenings filled with men in too tight tuxedos and women laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny. I was there, for work, networking, shaking hands, playing the part of the promising young executive. She was there because people like her belonged in those glittering rooms, moving through them like they owned the air everyone else was borrowing. I don't remember what ridiculous excuse I used to introduce myself. Something about the awful wine or the tacky floral arrangements. It didn't matter. She laughed, and I fell headfirst into a story that only I seemed interested in writing. The beginning was good. It was easy to believe she cared. She'd call at midnight just to say she missed me. She'd show up at my office unannounced with lunch in hand and that infuriating, dazzling smile. I thought I had cracked the code to her aloofness, that somehow I had reached a part of her no one else had managed to touch, but time has a way of revealing things love tries to hide. The little moments you excuse at first, the missed dinners, the distracted eyes, the way she always seemed somewhere else even when she was sitting beside you, those moments pile up until the foundation cracks under their weight. We got married, anyway. A part of me thought marriage would be the answer, the glue to patch over the invisible cracks. I bought the ring, rehearsed the proposal, tried to make it perfect. She said yes with a breathy laugh, clutching my hands like she couldn't. Believe her luck, maybe she couldn't. Maybe neither of us could. The wedding was beautiful. Of course it was. Caroline made sure of it. Every flower, every note of the music, every carefully curated detail was perfect. The guests toasted to a love they thought would last forever. I smiled through it all, convincing myself I had everything I ever wanted. I watched her dance under a shower of golden light and told myself the aching pit in my stomach was just nerves, not a warning. After the honeymoon, the real marriage began. It was quieter, lonelier. Caroline had her world and I was just a planet orbiting it, I thought if I loved her enough, if I worked harder, stayed patient, gave her space when she needed it and attention when she demanded it, eventually she would look at me and see home. But she never did. No matter how many vacations I booked, no matter how many late-night talks I tried to have, Caroline stayed locked in her own private kingdom. I was just a visitor, welcome until I overstayed. I noticed the change about a year ago. It was small things at first. The way her phone was always face down on the table, the sudden new passwords on her accounts, the detached way she spoke when she said she loved me, like she was reciting a line from a play she no longer believed in. I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. I just stayed. Because leaving felt like failure, and failing Caroline felt worse than dying. I had my own faults too. I drowned myself in work, in distractions, in pretending everything was fine. I let myself become a ghost in my own house, slipping through the days with a tight smile and tired eyes. My friends noticed. David, my supposed best friend, noticed. Diane, my lawyer, noticed. Caroline noticed too. She just didn't care enough to fix it. Or maybe she couldn't. Maybe she had stopped trying long before I even realized there was something to fix. Looking back now, I don't hate her for it. You can't hate someone for falling out of love. It happens slowly, like sand slipping through your fingers. You only realize it's gone when you finally close your hand and find nothing left. The night she confessed about loving someone else, she expected devastation. Maybe even hoped for it. But I had already grieved her a long time ago. I had already stood in the ruins of what we built and made peace with the fact that she never really intended to stay. I loved Carolyn. I really did. But sometimes loving someone means knowing when to let them go, and this time, I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight for a future she had already thrown away. I was going to walk away with my head high and my heart, finally, light enough to breathe. The papers sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days, unsigned, waiting. Caroline hadn't called. She hadn't texted. She hadn't even asked if I'd changed my mind. It told me everything I needed to know. I knew it was time to officially end it. There was no use pretending anymore. No grand gesture would fix the fact that we were already two strangers who happened to share a last name for a little while longer. I called Diane to set up the meeting. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk but not unkind. "Ready?" she asked, like she already knew the answer. "More than ready," I said. The meeting was supposed to be simple, civil. Two adults signing the end of their story. Nothing messy, nothing dramatic. I should have known better. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at the lawyer's office was David sitting in the lobby, pretending to scroll through his phone. He looked up, met my eyes, and had the decency to look ashamed, for half a second before plastering on a fake smile. I didn't smile back. I didn't even blink. I just walked past him, my heart hammering a little harder than I liked. Inside the conference room, Caroline sat poised at the table, a folder of documents neatly arranged in front of her like this was just another business meeting. She barely looked at me. Her attention flickered to David lingering outside the glass door, and for the first time I realized just how deep their connection already ran. It wasn't just some emotional affair. It had been physical. It had been going on for God knows how long, and somehow she hadn't even had the decency to tell me the full truth when she ended it. Diane noticed the shift in the room immediately. Her eyes darted between me and Caroline, her lips pressing into a thin line. She gave me a subtle nod, one that said, "If you want to walk away now, no one will blame you." But I didn't walk away. I sat down. I picked up the pen, and I signed. One stroke after another, I carved my way out of a life that had been killing me by inches. Caroline signed too, her hand steady, her face unreadable. When it was done, Diane slid the papers into her briefcase and said, "You're officially divorced." Her voice was neutral, professional, but I caught the flicker of sadness in her eyes when she looked at me. Caroline stood first. She smoothed her dress, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and without a single word, walked past me. David followed her like a loyal dog. I sat there for a long moment after they were gone, staring at the empty chair across from me, wondering how love could rot so quietly without either person noticing until it was too late. "You handled that well," Diane said softly. I forced a smile. "I've had a lot of practice pretending I'm fine." She didn't smile back. She just gathered her things and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder before leaving me alone with my silence. Outside, the world moved on. Couples held hands. Kids laughed on the sidewalk. Somewhere, someone else was falling in love for the first time. It all felt very far away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too hollow, without Caroline's ghost haunting the corners. I sat on the couch with a drink in my hand, staring at nothing in particular. That's when the first real wave of betrayal hit me. Not because Caroline stopped loving me. That part somehow I could forgive. You can't force your heart to stay where it doesn't belong. No, the real cut was how easily she had lied. How she had looked me in the eye night after night, kissed me goodnight, told me she loved me, while planning a different future that didn't include me and David. David, who had been in my home, at my table, laughing at my jokes, listening to my problems, pretending to be my friend. That betrayal dug deeper than Caroline's. I remembered the nights he and I sat at the bar, drinking, swapping stories, talking about how complicated relationships could get. He must have laughed inside, watching me bleed out my loyalty while he sat there already halfway into my life. I poured another drink, but the numbness didn't come this time. It was anger. Cold, clean anger. Not the kind that wanted revenge. The kind that wanted distance. The kind that drew a line in the sand and said, "No one crosses this again." I wasn't going to let them take anything more from me. Not my dignity. Not my peace. The next morning, I packed the rest of Caroline's things into boxes and had them delivered to wherever she and David were playing house. No letter, no note. Just a clean severance from a life that had already been bleeding me dry. Changed the locks, deleted her number, blocked David's. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, final, necessary. Because if there's one thing betrayal teaches you, it's that sometimes survival isn't about fighting to hold on. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly when to let go. And this time, I wasn't going to look back. Some nights feel heavier than others. After the divorce was finalized, there were moments when I thought I was fine. When the air felt lighter, the silence felt peaceful, and the emptiness around me was a blessing, not a curse. But there were also nights when the weight of it all collapsed onto my chest, squeezing until it hurt to breathe. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, the memories rolling over me like a tide I couldn't swim against. Not the big moments, the wedding, the trips, the milestones, but the small ones. The way Caroline would hum under her breath when she cooked. The way her perfume lingered long after she had left the room. The sound of her laughter echoing down the hallway when I managed to say something funny. I missed those small things, even if I hated myself for it. I knew I wasn't missing. Her, not really. I was missing the version of her I had built in my head, the Caroline who never existed outside of my hopes and projections. And that made the grief feel even heavier. Because how do you mourn something that was never real? The betrayal stayed, with me too. David's face flashed through my mind at random times. At the gas station, at the grocery store, when I passed the bar where we used to sit and talk about everything and nothing. I found myself replaying every conversation, every handshake, every laugh, trying to spot the moment when he had decided I was expendable. I never found it. Maybe that was the worst part. It would have been easier if they had been cruel. If Caroline had thrown insults if David had confessed with smugness. But they didn't. They slipped away quietly like thieves who stole nothing physical but everything intangible: trust, safety, history. Some nights I thought about calling Diane, about asking her if healing was supposed to feel this slow, this uneven. But I never did. I wasn't ready for someone to hear the cracks in my voice. I wasn't ready to be someone else's project, someone else's pity. So I carried it alone. I threw myself into work, Took on projects I didn't care about, attended meetings I didn't need to be at, anything to stay busy enough that the loneliness didn't have room to settle. But loneliness is patient. It waits. And eventually, it finds you. It found me one night when I came home to find a package on my doorstep. No return address, just a simple brown box. Inside was a framed photo. One of the few Caroline and I had taken early in our marriage, before the cracks had shown. We were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, faces pressed close. She had given it to me for our first anniversary. For a long moment, I just stared at it, feeling nothing at all. Then, slowly, the numbness gave way to something sharper. I smashed the frame against the edge of the kitchen counter, glass shattering into 100 tiny pieces that glittered on the tile like broken promises. Left the mess there. Swept around it the next morning like it was a grave I didn't know how to mourn. The days blurred together after that. Mornings bled into nights. Weekends disappeared like smoke. I lost track of time, floating through my life like a ghost, showing up where I was needed, smiling when it was expected, leaving before anyone could notice how hollow I had become. People said time heals everything. They lied. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to hide the limp. One rainy evening, I found myself parked outside a coffee shop I used to visit with Caroline. I hadn't meant to drive there. My hands just did it. I sat in the car for a long time, watching couples come and go, umbrellas spinning in the wind, faces close together to block out the world. I could almost see us there, 2 years ago, huddled together on that little bench inside, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. I closed my eyes and let the memory pass through me like a wave. I didn't fight it. I didn't hold on to it. I just let it come, and then I let it go. When I opened my eyes again, the parking lot was empty, and the world hadn't ended. It was a small thing, a meaningless thing, but it felt like the first real step forward I had taken in months. Grief is funny that way. It doesn't leave all at once. It leaks out slowly, like a wound you barely notice until one day you realize it's finally stopped bleeding. I wasn't healed. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But for the first time, I realized I wanted to try. I started calling old friends. I started reading again. I stopped avoiding the places that reminded me of her. I even answered Diane's text when she asked if I wanted to grab dinner. The world was still cracked. I was still cracked, but maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth building from the ruins. And maybe, if I was very lucky, the next time I handed my heart to someone, I'd know better than to give it away to someone who had never wanted it in the first place. The second betrayal didn't come from Caroline. It came from the one person I hadn't learned to distrust yet. It was a Thursday afternoon when Diane called me into her office. She sounded brisk, a little too formal. I thought maybe she needed my signature on something left over from the divorce, paperwork. I walked in, casual, unsuspecting, even managing a tired joke about how she was my favorite lawyer since she got me my freedom at a discount rate. She didn't laugh. Instead, she slid a manila folder across the table toward me, her hand stiff, her nails tapping nervously against the polished wood. "What's this?" I asked. "Just look at it," she said. I flipped the folder open and my stomach turned. Inside were transaction records, payments, transfers. A detailed paper trail neatly connecting Caroline's sudden burst of post-divorce wealth, not just to David, but to an offshore account I recognized immediately, because it used to be mine. Buried in the paperwork was a quiet theft. Before the divorce was finalized, while I was still scrambling to hold myself together, Caroline had accessed one of the trusts my grandfather had left me, a trust she had never legally had permission to touch. David had helped her, orchestrated it by the looks of it. Used my own trust fund, the one thing I had left from my family, as leverage to secure their new life together. I sat there in stunned silence, every word Diane was saying washing over me without sinking in. "You can press charges," she was saying. "You'd have a case. Stronger than most. They committed fraud, Charles. This isn't just betrayal, it's a crime. I closed the folder slowly, my hands unnervingly steady. It wasn't the money. It was the principle. It was the realization that even after walking away clean, even after choosing dignity over revenge, Caroline and David had still reached back to take more, like it wasn't enough to break me. They wanted to hollow me out completely. Diane watched me carefully, her posture tense like she was ready to catch me if I broke apart in front of her. But I didn't break. I leaned back in the chair and let out a slow breath, the kind that feels like it scrapes your lungs on the way out. "How long have you known?" I asked. Her eyes dropped to the table. "About a week. I wanted to be sure before I told you." A week. 7 whole days while I floated around thinking the worst was already over. Funny, how life keeps finding new ways to prove you wrong. I stood up, sliding the folder back across the table toward her. "File it," I said. She hesitated. "Charles, if you press charges, it'll be public, ugly. People will talk." I smiled coldly. "Let them." The Caroline I married, the Caroline I loved, was already dead to me. Whatever was left wasn't worth protecting anymore. The hardest part wasn't deciding to fight. It was accepting that I had been nothing more than a stepping stone in their climb toward something they thought they deserved. As I left Diane's office, a storm was brewing outside. Dark clouds rolling over the city skyline like the world itself was getting ready for a fight. Good. Let it rage. Because this time, I wasn't just walking away. I was making sure they remembered me every time they looked over their shoulders. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. That was the point. The night air was thick with the threat of rain, but I barely noticed it as I walked up the familiar stone path toward the house Caroline and I had once dreamed of buying together. I had laughed it off back then, called it too big, too cold, too much space for 2 people. Caroline had insisted it was perfect. Ironic that now she shared it with someone else. The security lights flickered on as I reached the door. No cameras, no alarms. David must have thought no one would dare to come looking, especially not me. I knocked once, sharply, with the side of my fist. Not a request, not a warning, just a statement. It was David who opened the door. His expression shifted from irritation to fear in the span of a heartbeat. He stepped back instinctively, like he could feel the storm rolling off me in waves. "Charles," he started. "Where is she?" I said. My voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that makes people nervous because they know it won't last. He fumbled for words. "She's not here." "Lying was never your strength," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The house was sterile, magazine perfect, expensive furniture, soulless decor, no sign of the life they thought they were building together. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, and then Caroline appeared, barefoot, wearing a silk robe like this was just any other evening. She froze when she saw me, her hand tightening on the railing of the staircase. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and poisonous. "You knew," I said finally. "You both knew exactly what you were doing." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Good. There was nothing she could say that would matter now. I dropped a copy of the trust fund documents onto the marble floor between us. They scattered like dead leaves, exposing every secret they thought would stay buried. "I trusted you," I said, my voice raw and quiet. "Even after everything, even after you chose him, I still trusted you not to become this." Caroline's face twisted, a flash of guilt or maybe just anger at being caught. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she said weakly. I laughed, a low, humorless sound that made David flinch again. "Is that supposed to mean something to me?" David finally found his voice. "Look, Charles, we didn't mean—" "Don't," I snapped, my eyes locking onto his. "Don't you dare try to paint this as some accident." I took another step closer until there was barely a foot of space between us. "You sat at my table. You drank my whiskey. You called me your brother. And All the while, you were stealing from me. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. I'm pressing charges, I said, my voice dropping even lower. Every cent you stole, every lie you told, it's all going public. Caroline gasped. You can't. I can, I said, and I will. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the overpriced chandelier overhead. Then Caroline stepped forward, her voice trembling. Charles, please. It was a mistake. We didn't plan to hurt you. I looked at her. The woman I had once loved. So fiercely it consumed me and felt absolutely nothing. No, I said. You just planned to hurt me enough to survive. David shoved his hands into his pockets, staring at the floor like a scolded child. I turned away from them both, my chest hollow but strangely light. Enjoy the house, I said over my shoulder. Enjoy everything you took. Then I opened the door and walked back into the night without looking back. The rain started halfway back to my apartment. By the time I reached my building, I was soaked through, but I didn't care. The water clung to me cold and heavy, but it felt cleaner than anything I had touched in months. When I got inside, Diane was waiting. She stood up from the lobby couch, her umbrella dripping onto the tiles, her hair damp from the storm. I figured, you might do something stupid, she said. Did you bring bail money? I asked, half smiling. Her eyes searched my face, probably looking for cracks, for fractures. Maybe she found them. Maybe she didn't. You okay? She asked finally. I thought about lying, about saying something easy and meaningless, but I had had enough of lies. No, I said, but I will be. She nodded, like that was the only answer that mattered. Together, we rode the elevator in silence. Together, we stepped into the quiet of my apartment. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Diane reached out and took my hand, simple, steady, no expectations, no apologies. I squeezed back, just once. I wasn't fine. I wasn't healed. But I wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed that someday, maybe sooner than I thought, I would be more than just the man Caroline. Left behind, I would be Charles again, and this time no one would take that away from me. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's clinical, precise, silent, until it detonates under the feet of those who thought they walked away clean. I didn't rush it. I didn't scream or post angry rants or show up in headlines drunk and pitiful. I let Diane do what she did best. Build the case, piece by piece, document by document, until it was airtight. It took 3 months. 3 months where Caroline and David paraded around town like they had won. 3 months where they smiled for the cameras, posted photos of their new vacations, their new beginnings. 3 months where they thought I was done. And then the hammer dropped, a quiet subpoena, frozen accounts, civil lawsuits, criminal charges for fraud. The media ate it alive. Not because of me, I didn't say a word publicly, but because the story was too good to ignore. Wealthy heiress and her lover indicted for stealing from her ex-husband's family trust. Social climbing gone wrong. A fairy tale turned scandal. Suddenly, the same people who toasted them were lining up to distance themselves. Caroline's father, the great magnate who once thought of me as beneath their family, issued a statement of profound disappointment. David's contracts dried up overnight. Brands dropped him faster than he could draft an apology. Caroline tried to spin it at first, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, a clerical error. But the numbers didn't lie. Her face was splashed across tabloids, her reputation shredded beyond repair. Pity turned to disgust. Admiration turned to mockery. The walls closed in, and this time, there was no one left to bail them out. I wasn't interested in gloating. I didn't need their public humiliation to feel whole again. Their fall wasn't my victory. My victory was that I had survived without losing myself. But make no mistake, watching them crash and burn was satisfying. Diane called the morning their assets were seized. Her voice was calm, almost detached. It's done, she said. I stared out my window at the city stretching wide and endless beyond the glass. I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath until I let it out in one long, steady exhale. Good, I said simply, and I meant it. There was nothing left to mourn anymore. No regret, no lingering ache. They had hollowed themselves out. They had betrayed themselves far worse than they ever betrayed me. And me? I was finally free. The final hearing wasn't mandatory, but I went anyway. Not to see them suffer. Not to rub salt into open wounds. I went because I needed to look at them one last time and feel nothing. When I walked into the courtroom, Caroline barely lifted her head. David sat beside her, his once proud shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear into the floor. I took my seat calmly, feeling every set of eyes on me, the whisper of journalists scribbling notes just outside the door. The judge called the session to order and the proceedings began. Facts, figures, evidence, no tears, no denials, just the cold clinical truth laid bare under harsh fluorescent lights. At one point, Caroline's lawyer asked if she could address the court. The judge allowed it. She stood, trembling slightly, and faced forward. Her voice was thin, a whisper, against the heavy silence. I made mistakes, she said. I hurt people I loved, and I'm sorry. Maybe she meant it, maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't erase betrayal. When the judge ruled, it was swift and brutal. Restitution. Damages. A criminal record that would follow them like a shadow for the rest of their lives. When the gavel fell, it was over. Really over. I didn't wait to hear the final paperwork read aloud. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out the doors without a backward glance. Outside, the sky was clear, crisp, bright, the kind of day that felt like a beginning, not an ending. Diane was waiting. By the steps, sunglasses perched on her head, arms crossed loosely as she watched me approach. You good? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. I wasn't just good, I was better. I smiled, a real smile, the kind that stretched all the way to my eyes. Yeah, I said. I'm good. She smiled back, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we had both survived to get here. Together, we walked down the courthouse steps, the city bustling around us, indifferent to the small wars fought and won behind its walls. Life didn't pause for my heartbreak. It wouldn't pause for my healing either, and I didn't want it to. I wanted to move forward, not to forget, but to live. 6 months later, I found myself standing in front of an art gallery downtown, not for business, not for anyone else, just for me. Diane had dragged me out, insisting I needed to act like a human being again. She was inside already, laughing at some terrible abstract sculpture that looked like a child's science project. I lingered near the door, my hands shoved into my pockets, watching the light spill out onto the sidewalk. I had changed, not in ways people could see. But inside, there was a sturdiness to me now, a quiet strength that hadn't existed before. Betrayal didn't break me. It rebuilt me. Caroline and David were just names in a story I no longer needed to tell. Their shadows didn't touch me anymore. Diane caught sight of me and waved impatiently, mouthing something about free champagne. I smiled and pushed the door open, stepping into the warm hum of life moving on. Some endings don't come with fireworks or perfect closure. Some endings are just quiet victories. Small, steady moments where you realize the worst is behind you and better days are still ahead. And if revenge was part of the road that led me here, so be it. I didn't regret it. I didn't regret surviving. I didn't regret fighting for myself when no one else would. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing anyone. I wasn't proving anything. I was just living, and that was the greatest victory of all.